Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
Associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked,
and sometimes what didn't,
you will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
And inspire you to do even greater things.
In this episode, I am in conversation with Jacob Kurian, an IT industry veteran and presently Honorary Secretary of the Association of People with Disability in Bangalore. Jacob has so many stories to share that we decided to publish this in two parts. In this, the first part, Jacob shares his early childhood and how his father was a great influence in his wanting to be an engineer. What his life lessons were staying in a hostel for further schooling. His first role related to project management in the construction industry and how he did not like that much. But a couple of times later in the career, how this experience created opportunities for new roles. How he took on the role of a product manager in one of the earliest and very successful products from built in India in the forex and money market space that served international clients. The opportunity he had to wear a sales and marketing cap, even though he calls himself an introvert, and to set up and streamline the sales activities in the US region. How he was ignored by a new person who had taken over professional services who should have been his customer. And how a large opportunity from GE changed this person's equation with Jacob. Just as things got more interesting, and Jacob started to share the story of GE's entry into India for outsourcing, we ran out of time for this episode. Please listen to the first part of his story in this episode. Listen on. Welcome to the Software People Stories. Jacob, this has been a conversation that has been long pending. I'm happy that we finally get to have this conversation. So for the benefit of our listeners, like we normally start, if you can introduce yourself, what is your origin story about associating with IT and your career trajectory, we can take it from there.
Okay. Obviously, I come from a pre-IT era where my father, who inspired my choice of career, was a factory man who spent all his life working on the shop floor, working in a factory. And in those relatively freewheeling days, when he would go to do a night shift check, he would take his kids along. So, I'd go, and I was very impressed by how everybody from the security guard would salute. And so my kind of childhood ambition was, I want to be an engineer and I want to work in a factory. So growing up, we spent a lot of our time growing up in small industrial towns. These were on the outskirts of Calcutta initially. Then we came to a place called Ranipet, which was a very small town in Tamil Nadu, where my father worked for EID Parry. It's no longer a small town. It's now a huge industrial hub. But in the time we grew up, it had one factory, which was the EID Parry chemicals, and all the Parryware, sanitary ware came from Ranipet. There was one hospital, there was one store, there was one club, there was one railway siding, and that was it. There was one petrol pump where we would all go to have. So it was a very small town. Everybody was a professional who you knew each other. You lived in a factory colony. And from there, actually, my mother, not my father, but my mother made the decision that we should not study in the village school. The village school actually there was only one school also, one English medium school. It shared a boundary with our quarters. So actually we could just climb over the wall and go to that school. But she made what, as a child, I felt was it wasn't a decision I could understand, to send both my brother and I to boarding school in Bangalore. So at the age of 7, I went away to Bangalore. Only now as a parent, I kind of realized what a great sacrifice that was. And I often wonder at if I had stayed on in Ranipet, what my career trajectory would be, and how the decision to send us to Bangalore changed perspectives, changed ambitions, changed even the ability to speak and write English well, were all the result of growing up in an urban city. Though we missed home horribly, we would cry, but growing up in a boarding also, and subsequently in a hostel in engineering, also meant that you imbibed certain values, which, if the benefit of hindsight, I don't know if they were great career values to have. But as boarders, I guess we had to justify in our minds that there was a reason we were sent away from our homes, because school also had, the majority were day scholars. So we'd see people coming with their parents, going home, and there would be this bunch of us who had to kind of macho up. And so we'd say, we don't suck up, we don't talk to the principal. The whole hostel got caned, you never snitched. Boarders don't do these things. Day scholars, they're not as tough as we are. They live with their parents and namby-pamby, spoiled kids. We are the tough guys. So I did my engineering, started to work in a factory. It's a whole different story that I had planned after 2 years to do an MTech or to do an MBA. A lot of people had, gone straight from engineering to a business school. I wanted to work, so I worked. I ended up getting sacked in my first job for my first brush with corporate politics. And I found that I couldn't get another job. So the 2 years became 3 years, because before I could finally get a job, went to Bombay, worked in an engineering consulting firm. And by that time, all of us engineers who were 3 years out of engineering school were meeting their batchmates who had finished 2 years of business school. And we were still traveling, maybe second sleeper or something. And these guys were flying. We were like, what? You got 3 years of work ex and you freshers, you guys. So we realized, I realized the world was a bit unequal towards engineers. And by then I had also kind of changed my mind about a master's in tech. I mentioned this project stint because this engineering stint with MN Dastur, because it kept coming back in my life in many ways. It was just a 1 year stint, but it's kind of how I segued into IT. So after 2 years, I finished, I got into business school, went to Jamshedpur. I was, for the longest period of time, aspiring to be a professional cricketer and had some credentials to play it, but almost every time I had to make a career choice between playing cricket full-time or studying engineering or graduating with a first class or getting a job, whatever. I did the middle class thing of those days and chickened out and said, no, I can't afford to not graduate, not get a first class. So when I went to Jamshedpur, in business schools, the level of competence in in sports is relatively limited. So I was a big star in the team. And through cricket, I actually met my current wife. And at that time, the person who I thought I would go steady with. Now, I'd never met a girl before because engineering was all male. Hostel school was all male. So for me, it was a novel experience. And she and I, we decided that we would go to Bombay and do our summer internship in Bombay, far away from everybody else, our parents, my parents. So summer placement started, and I was called by the placement office and told that you've already got a placement. So I said, how can I get a placement? I haven't even applied. I mean, applied, and we had all the schemes. She will get first in Bombay, then I will get, and all that stuff planned. And she said, yeah, well, there's this company called IDM, and they've given you a project. I said, I mean, other than learning some Fortran, theoretical Fortran in college, I had no experience in computers. Why would they hire me? I mean, so I had a big row, but eventually she said, you either go to Calcutta and join IDM or you're out of placement. So our grand scheme ended with Bharti going all the way to the West Coast, me going all the way. So I go to IBM and I asked the guy, why did you hire me? I mean, what? I have no computer skills. And he said, no, you have project management expertise. So I said, that was for building a steel plant. Okay? So they said, yeah, we need for our mini computer, we need a PERT CPM package. And since you're a guy who we found out the expertise, why don't you design it? So I kind of accidentally blundered into starting to write a PERT CPM package and learning to write it in BASIC, and found that I became completely obsessive about it. Those were the days when there were no debugger, nothing, So you literally went line by line to find some dot or a comma or something that was missing, and to just freak me out. The fact that you couldn't compile it, the fact that it kept not running. So I, at the end of that 2 months, decided that, no, this is not for me. Okay, this is just too obsessive, this thing. I'm not going to be a coder. It was nice to do, but that's it. So we went back. When graduation came, Tata Burroughs was actually a day one company in those days. I didn't apply. Happened to get into the Tata Administrative Service. And in the Tata Administrative Service, you actually do a stint in 6 companies. Okay, in the first year, you do 2 months. So I had finished a stint in 5 Tata companies, had again not considered ever going to TCS or TBL, which were the 2 companies at that time. And I knew that I was going to get an offer from all the 5. So I was generally thinking, what do I do? I couldn't decide on any of them. None of them seemed a good enough fit. They were all very stodgy, boring companies. They were the blue chips of the group, but they were very boring places. And then I got a call from Bombay House saying, please go and meet this gentleman called Dr. Prakash Hebalkar. He works for a company called Tata Burroughs. So I said, no, forget it. I'm not going to meet. I'm not going to go into computers. Okay, so just forget it. Okay, I'm not. I just need to do one more thing. I already have a problem of choice. I need to do one more company. So just send me somewhere. So the guy said, no, he's a senior vice president of a Tata company. You can't refuse to meet him. So I grumbled and all that. And I went to meet Dr. Hebalkar. And unfortunately, a lot of Indians, and in the telling of India's IT story, Doc Hebalkar is a figure that very few people know, and very few people have had the privilege to actually have worked for him. So I go in front of this guy, and he says, so why don't you come and work for Tata Burroughs? And I said, no, I'm not a coder. If I wanted to do this, I'd have just done it after engineering. Why do an MBA and then come and do this thing? I was like, I'm not doing this. So I'm like thinking of all these things. But Doc told me that, no, you should join a sunrise industry, not sunset industries like steel and automotive and etc. You should join a sunrise industry like IT. We were having this conversation in 83, 84. Certainly IT didn't look sunrise at all. But he told me, go to SEEPS. Why don't you go to SEEPS? And I have an exciting job for you. So I go to SEEPS, and all of you guys must have been there, but certainly it felt like going back to college again. Everybody was young, everybody was... there was certain buzz about the place. Everybody was talking about New York and this and that, and was so different in kind of vibe compared to all the major Tata companies in those days, TCA, Tata Steel, Tata Engineering, etc. So I went back to him and he said, India has to stop doing this body shopping business, okay, of sending skilled people there to work as coders. We have to build our own IP and we must build our own products and services. So I was like, okay, if you say so, but what's connected with me? And right. And so he says, we've been trying to build a product and it hasn't got finished. And you have project management experience. I was like, oh my God, not again. So you should go and project manage this product. I spent some time thinking about all the choices I had. The way the task thing works is you put in your three choices, companies put in their choices, and there's some matching and some bullshit about how the group priorities take this thing. Anyway, I surprised myself, my then fiance Bharti, everybody by saying, hey, maybe I'll put TBL as number one. And I think the panel were also equally shocked that somebody picked TBL. So I came to TBL. So I arrive in TBL, I'm given a cubicle. I turn around and I look around this place. I don't know anybody, but right behind me is somebody who looked familiar and turned out to be my batchmate from college, Mr. Gopalan. Yes, so Gopalan was sitting just right behind this cubicle that I was assigned to at seats. And I really didn't know what I was supposed to do. So I was then introduced to this product team, which was building Easy Deal. And I was introduced as, okay, this guy is your new manager. Okay, and I won't use certain names, but you're familiar with some of the personalities in that team. But I got the first taste of what prejudice really means. Okay, the hate was almost visceral. I was like, guys, I didn't ask for this thing, okay? So not only was I a task guy, I was, more importantly, I was a non-techie, I was a non-coder, and I had the temerity of being appointed as their boss. Anyway, to cut a long story short, that's how I actually entered IT. It was kind of more happenstance, Dr. Prakash Hebalkar's own vision for something that seemed quite fantastic at that time, and a strange series of coincidences from the fact that I worked in MM Dastur, then I got into IBM, then did some more projects there. Then, by the way, even during the task stint, I was asked by Tata Electric. I'm an electrical engineer by education. So Tata Electric said, I was in the deputy MD's office and I thought they'd give me some real hot thing to work on. And they said, we have all these projects and none of these projects seem to run on time. So we think you should write a program to help us track it. So I did some coding again in Tata Electric, all those big desktop mini computers. And again, I found myself horribly addicted to it. I ended up one day it was in Sterling Cinema. One day I finished code, trying to debug some program. I went down and I found the whole office is locked. I was locked in because they didn't expect anybody was there. And I couldn't get out of that office that whole night because I was locked in. But it again reminded me of this. I know things have changed so much from those days, but I was like, if you get into coding, that's it. You're not going to be able to have a life. You won't know what else to do. So I was this strange non-techie in a techie world.
Yeah, good. I didn't know your original origin story or the early stories. Yeah, that is something new for me. When we first met, it was about Jacob from TAS. TAS was always maybe 3 levels above coding or anything else. Saying, what does a manager have to do here? Okay. So in fact, you partly answered one question that crossed my mind, which is, as Okay, forget the project management part. At least as tasks, when you want to bring in systems, when you want to say think big and all that, working with the techies, the quote unquote techies, how was it to bring or get the techies to appreciate systems? While we probably develop programs or applications for others, most of us are not really that well organized.
Yeah. So I think that's been a truism that I saw throughout this career, that typically the companies that were advising somebody to do something seldom practiced it. Okay. Titan was just horrible at keeping to time on anything, though they were ostensibly selling watches to everybody else. So I've seen that strange pattern repeat many times. I think in relative to working on big factory, these things, software projects were relatively less complex because you were not talking about power and water lines and air and pressure lines and temperature and this and that. You're just looking at code. We had, as you know, TBL had the best people, but I think all we needed was to try and set some goals and try to work towards it. Make certain calls on in terms of what feature functionality the team needed to code. So we had this guy who was an external consultant called A.V. Rajwade. And Mr. Rajwade knew the entire world of forex. And we were building a foreign exchange and money market dealing room system which later was called Easy Deal. And so somebody had to decide, okay, we can't design for all the features in the world. We have to design for this set and we'll leave that out, etc. So I don't think I did a whole lot. It was completely crazy hours. I remember my wife and I got married in the middle of it, and I couldn't even go to buy a wedding ring. So she finally went and bought the ring as well. But we did get the product out and then started a whole different story, because once we got the product out, we realized there was nobody to sell it. Yeah, I mean, no, buying is separate. Somebody had to go and sell it, right? And Prakash's whole theory behind it was we needed to do it as a proof of concept that India can build a product, that India can sell IP, India can charge a price for it, which is not related to effort. Okay, so number of people into so many days, into so many months per rate, that it would have a price. And I would say, looking back, these were really pioneering thoughts at a time when the rest of India was nowhere near thinking about any of those things. Nor is it recorded in history that the first software products were actually built and sold by TBL. You know, Finacle and others came much later. But TBL built this. TBL built a product called SignBank. SignBank was the attempt to build a digital signature storage and retrieval system. And we managed to sell these systems to, I think we had HSBC rolling it out across Asia. So they were sold and successfully installed in a few thousand branches at least. The money market dealing room system was another whole different kettle of fish, because it was a very complicated system. In hindsight, clearly we shouldn't have built it. We were up against some giants like AP Dow Jones, Telerate, and Reuters. Their systems were in the millions of dollars. We had, okay, what do we price this at? So somebody said $25,000. So we said, okay, $25,000 is it. And when we found that we were not able to sell it, it was very depressing for the whole project team, the technical team, the project team, myself included. So out of frustration more than any ability to sell, I was a very introverted, still am a very introverted, non-classic sales guy. But I was like, damn, we've slogged for so many days and nights. At least we must sell one package. So I said, okay, I will go and sell. And I went to Europe, and with the help of the boroughs infrastructure. We were introduced to multiple banks. Boroughs were very strong in the financial systems arena. And we went to every bank and we said, okay, so here is this thing. And after you got past, oh, India has computers and India has people who can code stuff, etc. We would get to this chief dealer saying, no, I don't want this. I want it this way. I want it that way. I want it this way. And we would say, sure, no problem. You want it customized? No problem. We're not really expecting to win anything. We just did these proposals, made these things. And our hope was we can win at least one. This thing, because that was the only test. So we had the development team in Bangalore, in India, in Bombay, and we all happily sprayed these proposals around. And I learned an early lesson in two things. One is we didn't really understand product management and product releases and version controls and all that stuff, but also that your very success can be your undoing. So what happened was we won some 4 or 5 of these bids. 4 or 5 people said yes. Okay. And to each of them, we had promised sun, moon, and stars. Okay. And sure enough, it ended up being a complete disaster. Okay. So we couldn't install, we couldn't deliver, we couldn't keep to promises. But it ended up with me suddenly becoming the sales superstar. I was moved from the product group to the business office, which started me down a trajectory that I didn't really think I would ever have chosen to be in a sales, marketing, and business development role. Even many, many years later, when I was quite successful at it, people would still, my boss came to me and said, I don't understand how you're winning all these deals. So I said, what's your problem? He says, no, you don't drink, you don't smoke, you don't go out to bars, you don't play golf, all the classic, you don't even tell jokes. So there are many ways to skin a cat. I didn't fit the profile, but I was fortunate that, through God's grace, we had some success.
Yeah, interestingly, that was around the time when I got associated with EasyDeal, when effectively, even though we called it a product, there were so many parallel projects running.
Correct.
Yeah. That was interesting because every customer had their own specifications and requirements and all that. Good. I definitely had some questions related to the sales part, but probably we'll keep that for a different conversation. I wanted to segue a little bit after TBL, when you got into Titan, you are more like a user. I'm sure that you were using IT systems. So how was it working with either companies or service providers who had to give you systems? You are inside here developing, and there you are the user.
Yeah, I think it was the most humbling experience. So I should rewind a little bit on what happened with my career post that. So I was sent off to the US to start a new region called Latin America and Canada. It was a time when the model that we all followed was somebody would send in a request for people and we would find in our resume bank and send that there and, bill on a monthly basis or whatever. And that person would work as part of larger teams, very often led by some white guy. And we supplied the brain power. So what was happening at that time, which is, and I just rewind because I think it's an interesting milestone in the history of India's IT. There was only really TCS and TBL. And TBL was a spin out of TCS. So we did Barrow's work and TCS did all the rest. What was happening at that time was there were a bunch of entrepreneurs of Indian origin who were going around. So, you would go in, you would place somebody in an account and they would go in there, offer a green card and just switch. And since these were just individuals, the company was really not adding any value to it. Our business started going down. It was a hugely profitable business. And then almost overnight, under attack by these guys, the business started going down in the US, okay, which was the largest market. So I had many seniors who were running the major US marketplaces, and I was given this small little thing, but I took it a year later. When all of them crashed, I was the only one whose business did well, only because I was on a zero base. So I looked like growing, everyone else declining. I remember sitting and asking my seniors, who were all very brilliant, bright guys. So every quarter we do this presentation to show the slide going up, down, this way, down, up, down, up, down. And then somebody else would present a region. There was no pattern, nothing. It was just, to me, sitting there quietly thinking was just a random series of phone calls. If the calls come, this guy looks like a hero. If the call doesn't come, he has no clue what to do. And I was like, how can you run a business like this? Anyway, I was too junior to open my mouth. I kept quiet. And one by one, these seniors quit. Okay. And the business was heading into a precipitous free fall. And I think for no other reason other than the head office wanted a scapegoat, they decided that they needed to appoint somebody as the head of the US. Okay, so that there's a barrier between, otherwise all of us reported directly into India. And so the guy in India had to stand up and say why things are not going well. But if they could create a bakra in the middle, it would be, we could say, India could say, this guy, he's running this into the ground. So I became the first head of US Director Americas, as we were called. I think there was pressure from Burroughs, who had become Unisys by then, to say, we need to appoint a decision maker here. And for the first time, all US officers reported to me. We then, that was fine, but then what do you do? It was still going this way, like the Titanic, headed only one way down. And we had at that time started to do, well before my time, we had Tata Burroughs had set up an offshore development center, Bank Indo Suez, and we were slowly beginning to get projects and execute from India. And as I was thinking about how do I compete with these green card guys, because I can't offer any green cards, we made a decision to start to focus more and more on turnkey projects, because that A, didn't require me to bring people to the US, and B, I could promise outcomes, not worry about how many people, this, that, and the other. And that was more importantly something these upstart guys couldn't do at that time. And that business then turned around, okay? But it also ran into a time when Burroughs and Sperry merged to create Unisys. Now, here are all these chance things that happen in life. Because I was from Asia Pac, I was sitting in the Asia Pac office. And every night I would send these requisition requests. We would fax it to India, 3 programmers, 5 system designers, 2 Unix guys, 1 C. And at the fax machine was this Swiss gentleman. And he and I would stand and chat while we were waiting for our faxes to go to India. And he was a gentleman called Reto Braun. And Reto ran Asia Pac for Unisys. And because Japan was the only company that did well, Reto became president of Unisys. And Reto remembered that Indian guy who he used to meet at the fax machine. And because Unisys was doing so badly, there came opportunities to offshore stuff that they were doing in the US back to India. And I got moved to the main corporate block and was suddenly sitting in on meetings where they were discussing product strategy and what to do with this application, what to do with that application. Most of them looked around and said, who's this? Some Indian guy. Indians were not even on the technical executive floor in those days, let alone the corporate floor as is widely prevalent today. There was a white American from Sperry who took over professional services for the merged corporation, Burroughs and Sperry. And this gentleman Sperry had no operations in India. Okay, so he had no clue about this whole Tata Burroughs thing and just didn't get it, didn't care, was a bit, I would say, with the benefit of hindsight, prejudiced. He wouldn't even give me a meeting. And he had basically told everybody, Tata Burroughs doesn't matter, they're just another vendor. So for Tata Burroughs, it was a huge identity crisis. We had become Tata Unisys, but we had spent our entire life serving Burroughs customers, only Burroughs customers. TCS was playing everybody else, but we were stuck with only Burroughs customers. And now suddenly Burroughs is saying, Unisys is saying, they're just another vendor. We don't give a shit. Okay. So I was sitting there thinking, I tried, to meet this guy, tell Reto this, that. He was so arrogant, so dismissive. So one day by mistake, inquiry came to me from HP saying that we want to build a professional services business. HP was also all hardware, wanting to build a professional services business. And by some fluke, it came to me. So I went off to meet HP in California and told them the whole jing bang. They, of course, had never heard of all these things that were happening in India at that time. And they were like completely amazed. So they said, okay, we need so many guys, but what size of order do you want to take? So I was like, what? So I didn't know what to say. So I said, $1 million, okay, which was like unimaginable. So the guy said, okay, we'll send it to you. So I came back saying, what? And I had pitched Unix so that we are somewhat neutral. Obviously, none of the proprietary stuff we could pitch then. And I came back and I got this order. Now the thing was, nobody in Bombay knew because my bosses, Burroughs would have gone, Unisys had a fit if they heard that we were going to work with. So I go back to meet this professional services guy. And he makes me wait outside, then makes me sit there, and he's talking to another guy. He completely ignores me. And then eventually he says, yeah, so what? What do you want? What do you want? In this very rude and so I said, no, I just came to ask your advice on something. So he said, yeah, what is it? What is it? Hurry up. I really don't have time. Can't you see I'm busy? So I said, please tell me what to do with this. And I just put that order there in front of him. And he literally, double blinked. And he said, you can't do this. So I said, well, I have employees, I have shareholders, I have a management, this thing. I'm quite okay for you to tell me that I have no role in the Unisys world. So I presume you have no objection to my going out and finding my way around the world. That day, it changed a whole lot of things for Tata Unisys in the US. That conversation, we eventually didn't do HP. I would have never been allowed to do HP, but it turned my professional equation with this guy. And subsequently, we started to play a much more strategic role in the way that we did business. There was one more moment that I just want to share with you before we go off to Titan and what life was on the other side. So I'm doing pretty well. The business in the US has turned around. We are doing much more strategic work. I'm sitting in on all these meetings. And one day, Reto's office called and said, there's a call from GE. Reto wants you to go up and meet this guy called Ed Skyko. He has some interest in doing some work in India.
And don't forget to listen to the next episode that will feature the second part of our conversation, where he shared what happened with the GE opportunity and his transition to a manufacturing company as a CIO and marketing head. Of course, if you subscribe to the Software People Stories on your favorite podcast client, you'll be notified when the next episode is published in a week.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People Stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.